the whole Soul team for the invitation. I'm sorry I couldn't listen to the whole day today. I'm currently in Palestine and I'm like organizing myself between different activities. I will be talking about the project that we did last year in Moderna Galleria in Ljubljana, and that is the project on political performance in the 90s in the post-Yugoslav context. And let me share the screen with you. I have a PowerPoint ready, but I would like to say a few words about it. And as you might know, this is the project of Moderna Galleria, and it's also part of our Europe's Internationale Museum Confederation. So research and mapping of political performance in the region of former Yugoslavia started when I invited 10 colleagues to work together as a team in 2018. And as a matter of fact, we were born in the same country, that is Yugoslavia, in the 70s and 80s. And now we all live in different post-Yugoslav states. And while researching the 90s, one has to bear in mind that the 90s were a really difficult period for the whole region. And of course, for the people of that region. That was the decade when the breakup of the country happened. Ethno-nationalisms, the war atrocities, genocide, and also transition from one system, that is from socialism to another, capitalism. And it's still difficult to find a common name for the region, former Yugoslavia, post-Yugoslavia, and Western Balkans being the most neutral. That difficult decade, not only for researchers in the field of art, but also, or even more so, for scholars exploring its history, society, economy, left a profound mark on the decades, all the decades that followed. So our present time, let me put it like a state of emergency, seems in many respects a direct continuation of the 1990s, particularly in the way in which right-wing politics are managing the current crisis and government the states in the region of former Yugoslavia. So, I don't know. Okay, so now I can, all right. Okay, so this is better. Okay. So what is quite evidently happening in the field of culture in Slovenia and what happened in some of the other ex-Yugoslav countries much earlier is an aggressive turn to national monoculture, to conservatism, to populism, removing critical voices from institutions, etc. And this is, in short, a time of attempted silencing, with the systematic destruction of democracy and the rule of law, attacks on the media, as well as the dissolution of the welfare state. And art and culture, of course, are no exception. And those that are active in the field of art and culture are resisting and fighting against this conservative system in ways and with means that are very similar to those employed during the 1990s. So, the main topics of our research were, of course, performance and the political. And we understood political performance not merely as some kind of witness to events, but a form of resistance against war machines. And this is the concept that we borrowed from Deleuze and Guattari. So war machines that are related to power, to institutions, to state, to identities, to language. And this is kind of resistance that has often emerged under extreme political situations. And that was mainly the case in Serbia, Bosnia Herzegovina, and Kosovo. So in broader terms, political performance also means performing the political, which subsumes specific performative gestures as strategies of resistance or revolt. And one important thing that I would like to mention is that these practices that we are discussing and that I'm also going to show you today. So with very few exceptions, were not part of Western anthologies and overviews on performance, especially before the 2000s. The very few artists from our region that were mentioned were interpreted in the frame of Western understanding of performance, or were described as a kind of dissident voices from Eastern Europe. This only changed when artists and theorists started turning back to their local histories and spaces with a new production of local knowledge. In the landmark exhibition body in the East, you see a poster of that exhibition. This exhibition was staged at Moderna Galleria in 1998, and it was also included at our exhibition on political performance. So at this exhibition, Zdenka Badovinas, who was a curator, showed the simultaneous existence of performance practices that, at least formally, did not differ substantially in the East and the West, but the difference lay elsewhere, namely in different readings of gestures in different spaces, where these gestures acquired different meanings, other meanings. In the performance of the 1990s, this say Eastern identity started to become less visible. So we started, of course, our research on politics and performance with a set of questions that would help us clarify what political performance really was in the post-Yugoslav context. What did performance, then an already established art form in the West, bring, mean, or change in the wider field of art of the 1990s? And can one actually talk about performance which is outside the political? Is performance even the right term for such a vastly varied production in then newly founded states, from Slovenia in the north to Macedonia in the south? Of course, there was also no common or shared understanding of performance in the region, which was primarily the consequence of considerably different socioeconomic and political circumstances. I'm going to show some images from the exhibition. And consequently, one of the arguments of our politics and performance project was the following. With the dissolution of a two-bloc political system in the world, and with the dissolution and wars in Yugoslavia in the early 1990s, a significant change took place. In search of new identities, the newly founded post-Yugoslav states turned either toward Western models or relied more on their local traditions, emphasizing ethnic elements, or opted for a combination of internationalization, national symbol, with kind of political embrace of multiculturalism. And also what was once considered, at least on a theoretical level, a common Yugoslav cultural space was after 1991 divided into many local art scenes that were very different from one another, and were all marked by a particular national context. While in the 1990s in Slovenia were a period of enthusiasm, the beginning of contemporary art, and the opening to the global art world, the rest of former Yugoslavia had to deal with more traumatic circumstances. And in Slovenia at that time, it's also quite significant, this unresponsiveness or silence about certain political events, such as war and war-related crimes in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And that was somehow characteristic of art at that time in Slovenia. The exhibition explored the relationship between performance and the political and ideological structures from which those performances arose. But it was also, on the other hand, an attempt to rediscover the emancipatory potential of the political performance of the 90s and to find connections with the current situation in the region. There were 120 participants at the exhibition, around 420 works archival materials, video, etc. And of course, because we were 10, each curator presented some specifics of the space he or she researched. And at the end of the process, we arranged those materials following 8 broader themes that I'm going to show you now. But these, of course, are only some images of works from the exhibition. So the first topic, of course, we couldn't avoid it, was war and nationalism. And that kind of embraced the first half of the 90s, that is 1990 to 95. The first image that you see is from 92. These are anti-war protest demonstrations in Sarajevo. And with this, we can even say mass performance, the 1,000 days siege of Sarajevo began. This author is also from Sarajevo, Ante Juric. And it was a performance, actually a series of 4 performances, where the artist fired several bullets from a pistol at various surfaces, as to say, shoot at materials and not at people. And what is like tragic also, that after the 4th performance, he was wounded by a sniper from a nearby mountains above Sarajevo after the 4th performance. This is the work of Slaven Tol from Croatia from 93. And this was during the war. And the artist came directly from the front line in Dubrovnik to do a performance in Valencia, in Spain, at a youth biennial. So the performance consisted of taking off multiple layers of clothing that he had, starting with his coat. And then he performed the act of pinning mourning buttons, black buttons on each layer of clothing, because in that region where Slaven Tol is from, black button signifies mourning. So at the end, when he took off all his clothing, he stitched a black button directly on his bare skin. The second topic was post-95. So that's after the war period and the consequences of war, transition, refugees, otherness. This is the work of Oliver Musovic from Skopje, North Macedonia, called Freedom of Movement. It's a performance from 99. You can see that well, but I will tell you shortly what's about. It's about the refugees from Kosovo. This was during the war in Yugoslavia. Coming to Skopje, Macedonia, seeking asylum in Western Europe. And then before boarding these rescue planes, they were stamped on their hands. And these stamps kind of are like reminiscence of tattoos in concentration camps of the Second World War. The artist Arma Sulevic is from Bosnia and Herzegovina. And she has been working on a project to clear the land of mines since 1997. So deactivating the minefields to finance the cleaning. She had been selling soil from these minefields in small bags that she had also sewn herself. Another topic, very important, was media of very political magazines from that time, from former Yugoslavia. So media covers, we choose representations from each of the former republics, because we saw that media covers were also in a way performative gestures, performing the political, reaching much wider audience and sometimes also producing very strong reactions. The next was public spaces and demonstrations, which is mostly related to Serbia. That is the political performances there, because they were part of demonstrations against the regime that were happening throughout the 90s. The first that I'm showing is Sasha Markovic Mikrob. And this, what you see are the series of masks that you put on your face. He was producing massively those masks with various political slogans or with political interpretations, and very political, that people put on while going to demonstrations, while being in the street, and also while doing some things in other public spaces. This is survival coupons, and survival coupons that are not coupons for example, bread, oil, gasoline, that were at that time circulating in Serbia because you couldn't buy these things. But they're survival coupons that were given on the streets to people by the Škart groups, and they are coupons for happiness, coupons for revolution, coupons for orgasm, and so on. And maybe the most extreme example of this political performance is a magnet, Falu, Serbia. I made a mistake here. It's not 86, it's 96, actually. That's the center of Belgrade, and that's against the politics of Slobodan Milosevic at that time, against Serbian nationalistic politics. And the main person, the main member, or one of the most exposed members of the group was Nune Popovic, that you can see here, carrying big phallus with Slobodan Milosevic photo on it. And he was often detained and arrested and had to seek political asylum in Slovenia. Another grouping quite important for the 90s was newly established spaces, which are independent, NGOs, artist-run spaces, even squads. And these production or creation of new spaces was also in the domain of political and performative. And here on that I'm pointing is the Metelkova from Ljubljana. That's an old army barrack, Yugoslav army barracks, which was squatted and taken in '93, and it still exists. Now it's called Metelkova Network. And if you've been to Ljubljana, to our museum, we are neighbors of that Metelkova network. Of course, there are many more of such new spaces, but I'm only showing another one, which is Dodona Theater in Pristina, in Kosovo. Kosovo was, since '89, under so-called special measures, because the Serbian Milosevic regime has imposed martial law on Kosovo. And this state of emergency lasted the next 9 years and was based upon ethnic segregation and state-sponsored violence against the Albanian majority. So at that time, basically everyone lost jobs, state institutions were closed, and also cultural, economic, and political institutions were closed. And at that time, schools and University of Pristina were closed, and this was marking the beginning of a decade-long parallel school system in Kosovo that usually happened in private houses. Dodona Theater was originally established as a puppet theater and became one of the really rare self-financed cultural educational spaces that remained open throughout the 90s, as they called it, also the only cultural window in Kosovo of that time, a symbol of cultural resistance. Feminism and very important issues in the 90s, also related to arts. And here are works of Maja Bajević from Bosnia and Herzegovina, Sanja Iveković, and Women in Black, which is an activist group from Belgrade, very active since '91 and still existing, with street performances against war, sexism, militarism, and nationalism. They were basically the only ones in Serbia during the 90s who were also engaging in anti-war activities, but later on collecting testimonies of rape, crime, and other forms of sexual violence in Yugoslav wars. Sanja Iveković founded Women Art Center Elektra in Zagreb, and this was a one-day action, The Face of Language. It was an action in the park, which included posters with faces of abused women with accompanying verbal statements against gender violence. And next week is a work of Maja Bajević, Women at Work Under Construction, 99, Sarajevo, where Maja was collaborating with the women of Srebrenica in a 5-day long performance of waving patterns found on Bosnian kilims onto the scaffolding structure erected on the facade of the Art Gallery of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And the performance was executed by women who, besides suffering tragedy in Srebrenica, genocide, losing 9,000 men, sons, husbands, brothers, these women were also socially marginalized and exposed to political games and manipulation. The topic, especially important for Slovenia for the 90s, was radical body, with one particular space in Ljubljana, Kapelica Gallery, which since mid-90s played a pioneering role in this radical physicality, testing the limits of the body, as well as the idea that the body is no longer just a mere presence. So challenging archetypes, identity politics, sexuality, bringing the body to extreme limits, to excess pain, pleasure, also body transforming into a cyborg. And then the last topic was the state, territories, and political rituals. And in many ways, this was a continuation of the retro avant-garde art of the 1980s in Slovenia. And an example in such work is the NSK State in Time, which was established in 92 as a utopian transnational formation in which art was a constitutive element of politics and in which politics became a performance. Even though NSK State is without the physical territory, the NSK State in Time employs state mechanism issuing passport, flag, organizing temporary embassies and also congresses. And in the back here, you can see the Irving group that collaborated with armies of several countries in the NSK Guard project starting in 1998. So at the end of the research, there were even more questions, I must say that, than at the beginning of our project. For example, and we heard some of these questions already in the previous presentation. What is expected of a political performance once it has been recognized as such? Does it lose its critical power or position? Because a repeated performance, of course, is never the same, nor can mediation, that is photography, video recording, description, object, etc., become a substitute for the event itself. So in other words, what is a performance if almost anything can be seen as performance? And furthermore, which performance are we talking about? And maybe to make this connection, the performance of the 90s that I mentioned at the beginning and the contemporary situation in Slovenia, we also included two works at the exhibition that are dealing precisely with today's political situation in Slovenia to emphasize the fact that the 90s are still here. And the first work is by Istvan Huzjan, and it's a symbol of Friday's anti-government protest in Ljubljana, which have been going on since March 2020. And also part of the exhibition was the closing participatory performance of Maja Smrekar, where all exhibited works were covered with black cloth, which is symbolically a very strong gesture, especially having in mind the socio-political context of the time in which the exhibition closed, and it closed in October last year. And the situation is still the same in Slovenia, if not even worse. So instead of conclusion, maybe again some thoughts for deliberation. Where are we now 30 years after the war and the breakup of Yugoslavia? And what happened to the belief in this, in some kind of better world? How do war machines operate nowadays? Are their mechanisms any different than they were back in the 1990s? And how do we resist them? So thank you very much. That was my contribution. Just a thank you from Gonca Gümüşşayak to all panelists. Thank you, Bojana. Thank you, I don't know if I pronounced the name correctly. I'm sorry.
Okay, then let me ask a question regarding the project. Firstly, I know that there is a publication parallel to the exhibition Realize, Resist and React. It is also currently available at SALT Research. I know that this project was based on long-term research, and you compiled archival materials for this research with support of research team. Could you please mention how do the curator and research team collaborate during exhibition making?
How we collaborate during the preparation of for the exhibition and the research. That's what you meant, Cezin.
Yes.
Yeah. But you know, it was a time just before COVID pandemics. So it was very difficult because this is the field research and we have to go to archives and we have to talk to people. And in this time, you couldn't do any of that. But somehow we managed. It was not the easiest thing in the world to do. But, and also luckily because we know a lot of these people, a lot of these artists, a lot of these places. So somehow when everything was in lockdown, we were able to get many materials online. And we also held regular meetings via Zoom. And then actually we couldn't even meet for the opening of the exhibition because there were still some restrictions on travel. The first time all of us met in person physically was in September, just before the closing of the exhibition. But it was a very challenging and interesting process because, of course, not all of us are art historians, not all of us work in the museum. Some people are activists, some people are from NGOs, some people are from the dance scene, and so on and so on. But I think this is really the beauty of it, to get so many different opinions and so many different researchers and thoughts on performance and politics. I think it gave this project an extra perspective because we were all from different backgrounds and these backgrounds were complementary to one another, and they were not like that this would be the problem for the project. And also, I think, because I know it's also discussion about how to keep these materials, and we are not keeping them because we have the digitized versions of these materials, but we do not have them in our possession. We were invited to do this exhibition in the Museum of Contemporary Art in Zagreb in 2023. And I think this exhibition being that will be shown then in another context, in the context of Croatia, will have another dimension, and that is more focus on the Croatian context. Maybe this Ljubljana had a little bit more focus in the Slovenian context, but this in Croatia will have some other context. And I think this would also be an interesting process to follow.
I remember this process we were talking during our Internationale Archive meetings. And this exhibition enabled you the institution to compile materials on the performance and politics in the 90s post-Yugoslavia, and it presents a comprehensive resource on that issue. Are there any, you already said that you don't have rights to make them available, but are there any plans to make this compiled archive available via any online platform or from at any institution?
At the moment, we have what we have is the images of the performance. We had public programs, and that's all recorded online. We have the publication, which is also available, not yet online, but we will put the PDF of the publication online. And unfortunately, the rest is stored with me, and we have not asked all these 120 artists to give us permission due to various situations that we have also in Slovenia and also in our institution. But we will see what happens. And I think that would be a great compilation of archival materials to have for researchers. I agree with you completely here, says in.
Hello, Bojana.
Hey, Amira, hello.
Hello.
Hi.
I have some questions too.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you were mentioning that, and of course, because it's the exhibition was especially focusing on post-Yugoslavia, as you mentioned, there has been it was a very geographically very wide scope, and you mentioned that there has been differences. So how you and the team was able to underline these differences, or was that an issue even, or it was just there to left to the audience or to a more detailed research, yeah.
Yeah, we did not make those differences so exposed at the exhibition. I mean, if you walk through the exhibition, for example, when it started with war and nationalism, it was obvious that the most political performances related to that were from Bosnia and Herzegovina and Serbia and Croatia. And in Slovenia, as I mentioned at the beginning, in 91, there was this complete turn towards Western Europe, towards Western models, towards contemporary art, and also this very, very present silence within the artist community and within the art world, with a very few exceptions to what was happening in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Serbia and to the wars and so on. I think only maybe in the mid-90s it started to change a little bit after the war was over, or at least in Bosnia and Herzegovina. But more specifically, the artists started to reflecting in Slovenia on those issues after the 2000. And in the other parts of former or post-Yugoslavia, also, the situation with the art system were completely different. In some places, they have to be built anew. Some places, national institutions of culture were totally nationalistic, following the main agenda of the governments. So the NGOs took place of national institutions. So very complex situation. And of course, yes, we had to deal with that. But this is not, maybe for somebody who's coming out of that region, maybe it's not so visible, but for the people from the region, I think it was quite, they could read it easily.
Many thanks, Bojana. It was the last presentation of the program. And for today, we would like to thank all participants for accepting our invitation and being part of the event.